honored and humbled that people who have worked in righting racial inequalities for decades have agreed to bring their expertise into today's discussion. I also want to thank the counselors Lori Price Abrams, David Cummings Sr., as well as Mayor Sean Spiller for meeting with us a few weeks ago to discuss policing in Montclair and subsequently agreeing to attend this town hall as well. We wanted to create an environment where various groups could come together to speak to each other and to their elected officials and educate the town about various areas in which Montclair needs to do better with a specific eye towards policing and budgeting. This is certainly not the beginning of the conversation in Montclair, but we hope that this event will bring the discussion to a wider audience in town. We have an amazing slate of speakers today, from the young to the less young, followed by our town councilors responding to a few of your questions that were submitted via the registration form. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic over to our wonderful moderator, Deirdre Malloy.
Thank you, Gabe. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. As mentioned, my name is Deirdre Malloy, and I'm your moderator for this event. The statements and opinions you will hear today are those of the presenters. Just a few housekeeping rules. Each presenter will have 10 minutes to speak, give or take, and will be notified when the time is lapsing. The next presenter will be called upon. Questions have been previously provided. The following statement is from the Montclair Beyond Policing's Town Hall organizers. We urge Montclair to embrace its core values of cherishing Black lives, ensuring individual collective safety and well-being, providing for all its residents, and building strong relationships within our community. Toward these ends, we urge the council to divest from our overfunded police department that disproportionately targets Black community members and to instead direct funding towards essential services and programs like housing, food security, schools, and healthcare, including mental health services. The order of presentations will be as follows. William Scott, Chairman of the NAACP Housing Committee and Co-Chair of the Montclair Housing Commission. Antonello Terrana for Essex SCAPE. Pressman Interns, Gabe Sloan, Sahai Lukes, and Caleb Levine. And Joanne Foster of UUCM's Social Justice Coalition, and Annalise Sherfin of the UUCM Undoing Racism, and last but not least, Lily Quee, Maya Jenkins, and Ella McDonald from Montclair Beyond Policing. Let's get started with our first presenter. William Scott is no stranger to our community. He's a lifelong resident of Montclair, New Jersey. He has attended Montclair Public Schools and graduated from Montclair High School in 1969. Upon receiving a certificate in computer programming from Electronics and Computer Programming Institute, he attended Essex County College and obtained a degree in computer science and business administration. William pursued his career and goals and began working in the Newark Board of Education as a senior computer operator. Then he was promoted to a manager of computer operations, and he left the Newark Board of Education and began his career at Xerox. And he was later senior printing systems analyst and retired after 30 years. Being a lifelong resident of Montclair has fostered William's dedication and commitment to the community. He has worked with several committees and organizations such as Friends of Canterbury and Nishawane Park, the Montclair Parks and Recreation Committee, Montclair African American Heritage Day Parade, and many others. Over the years, William has recognized, by local community-based organizations, including, but not limited to, the New Age Networking and Community Service Award he's received here, the Montclair chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha, say that fast 5 times, sorority, and as well as the Montclair branch of the NAACP Community Service Award, the Montclair African Heritage Foundation Ambassador and Community Service Award as well. Without further ado, I'm going to just go into asking Mr. Scott if he would just go ahead and present to us at this time.
Hello, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Lord for another day. I also would like to thank the Pressman intern and the Montclair board, Montclair Beyond Police organization for this opportunity to participate in this very important town hall meeting. I also look forward with working and speaking with the rest of the participants. Also, at this point in time, I would like to thank the moderator, Deidre Malloy, who is also the co-chair of the Montclair Housing Commission, my co-chair of the Montclair Housing Commission, I'd like to say, and also the chair of the Montclair Landlord Tenant Committee. Okay, the 104-year-old Montclair branch of the NAACP is the oldest civil rights organization in Montclair. We continue to fight for voting rights, equal rights, human rights, housing rights in this country and also the township of Montclair. The Montclair branch of the NAACP has always reached out and partnered with all organizations who have the same nonviolent core values of the NAACP. As the current chair of the Montclair NAACP Housing Committee and co-chair of the Montclair Housing Commission, I have been working with my colleagues, Dr. Renee Baskerville, who was the liaison for the Montclair Housing Commission for over 12 years and is currently a member of the Montclair NAACP Housing Committee. We have been able to increase funding for affordable housing first-time home buyers, a down payment assistance program, which we changed from a loan to a $2,500 grant. We also increased the funding to maintain the affordable housing inventory in the township of Montclair to $15,000 to a grant. But currently, we have approximately 785 affordable units in the township of Montclair. But unfortunately, we have a waiting list of over 800 Montclair residents. The past administration began to recommit themselves to the 20% set aside for affordable housing in the township. Unfortunately, the past 6 years, the commitment was not upheld in a lot of the redevelopment areas. But with the recommitment last a couple of years ago, we have been able to put that commitment for a 20% set aside back in place. And we've also been able to have a commitment for workforce affordable housing set aside for the teachers, policemen, firemen, etc., who work in Montclair and should have the opportunity to live in Montclair. We also monitor all planning board meetings, council meetings for any changes relating to residential projects or ordinances. In 2016, we refocused our effort and the lack of rent control in the township of Montclair. We had many forums and conversations. Real Talk, a public forum presented by the Montclair Justice Coalition, conducted a meeting. We had conversations about the high rents in the township of Montclair and the lack of rent control. Past challenges on rent control in Montclair. Unsuccessful is to stabilize rents have a long time history of Montclair. In 1979, a rent control ordinance was voted down by a 62% to 38% of the residents of Montclair. A housing survey conducted about 30 years ago after the Bay Street station was built saw that gentrification was absolutely on the rise. The suggestion that a rent stabilization be reinvestigated again was initiated. A form in 1986 was again failed, but also another study was conducted in 2004 with a recommendation for a rent stabilization, but unfortunately the study that was conducted had the rent control recommendation pulled from the study. But unfortunately, at that point in time, the Montclair Housing Commission and the Montclair Landlord Tenant Committee was recommended through that study and adopted by the town council at that time. April 2017, the co-chair of the Montclair Housing Commission and NAACP Housing Committee with Councilwoman Baskerville, Steve Cooper, Alteria Homes in New Jersey, Deidre Malloy of Home Corps, hosted a first-time home buyers forum at the Wally Choice Community Center in Linfield Park, which also covered the unfortunate foreclosure problem that was happening in the township of Montclair, and again, the lack of rent control as well. June 2017, a gentrification YouTube video was created by Zachary Brown, a student at Bloomfield College. The YouTube video focused on the gentrification within the fourth ward of Montclair and the lack of affordable housing. The participants in that YouTube video was the pastor of, the pastor John Rogers of First Congregational Church of Montclair, myself, and also Ted Wickner, who is of Wickner Properties LLC, and residents of Montclair. And we have passed that YouTube video on to some of the organizations. We can provide that in the future if necessary. In November, we partnered with Planet Civics, an internet web service provider, and did an online survey for rent control possibilities in the township of Montclair with recommendations. In May of 2018, at the Montclair Council meeting, a presentation by the students of Montclair High School Center for Social Justice, a civic and governmental class, did a presentation on rent control strategies to be considered by the council at the time. We were also receiving lots of input from the Landlord Tenant Committee with concerns with large increases of unconscionable rent increases in the township of Montclair. Complaints were being filed from tenants being asked to pay additional increases from 10, 20 to even 30% increases in their monthly rent. April 2019, the Universal Rent Affordable Rent Control Forum was held at the Charles Bullock School, hosted by the Montclair branch of NAACP, the Housing Committee of the Montclair Township. We had our moderator again, which was Councilwoman Baskerville. We also had property owners in the audience. We did try to invite the Property Owners Association of Montclair, but they declined the invitation at that particular time. It was a very well attended forum. It was also taped on Channel 32. At the end of the conclusion of that forum, we had the opportunity to see a new organization be created right before our eyes, which was the Tenants Organization of Montclair, which was created by Ahab Lidad and Tony Martin. On February 2020, another rent control forum was held at the St. Mark's Methodist Church. It was hosted by Al Pelham, president of the NAACP, also myself, the Montclair Housing Commission, also the Landlord Tenant Committee, and also the Tenants Association of Montclair. We also had Rabbi Elliot Teberman of the NAACP Church, as well as the Tenants Organization of Montclair. And we were absolutely engaged in several conversations in regards to rent control in the township of Montclair. With the continued conversation and concerns about rent control in the township of Montclair, presentations have been made to the township councils. On April 7th of 2020, the township of Montclair adopted a rent control ordinance for the first time. This was the first time that we had gotten an ordinance before the current town council, and we got a 5-2 vote to support a rent control ordinance in the township, which is the first time. Unfortunately, the Property Owners Association of Montclair are suing the township to stop the implementation of the rent control ordinance. We are waiting for the judge's final decision as to what the future process will be and looking forward to the implementation of the rent control ordinance or putting the rent control ordinance before the public from a referendum standpoint. But I just would like to point out a couple of the talking points of the Montclair Property Owners Association, which indicate that if we have an ordinance, we're going to increase property taxes for all town properties in Montclair, lower property values for all property owners in Montclair, decrease affordability for renters in Montclair, and decrease the supply of rent in Montclair.
Thank you, William. Would you kindly close at this point, please?
Sure. As a property owner, myself for 40 years, and also a resident of the township of Montclair, the rental property has been in my family for 75 years. I've owned it myself for the past 40 years. The points of opposition that are being pointed out by the Montclair Property Owners Association are misleading. We have had increases on properties throughout the township for many, many years, and those increases have never occurred because of rent control. So it is misleading information that's being provided. And as a property owner, I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that, William. We do have to move on. Our next presenter is Antonello Terena of Skate, Essex. And for his presentation, he will be talking about how skaters have been treated poorly and unfairly, especially by the police. There is an unmerited negative stigma attached to skateboarding that many people automatically cling to, causing skateboarding to receive little reinforcement from the community and police to most likely treat a group of skaters unfairly. And since skateboarding is a very diverse sport, this raises chances of skaters being harassed. And the whole point, I think, of Antonello's presentation is just to dispel the myths of skateboarding and talk about the joy that it brings to them and why it's important to allow skateboarding in Montclair. Antonello?
Yes, thank you so much. So hello, everyone. I'm honored to be able to speak here today and very thankful that I can share skateboarders' experiences with the police and how skateboarding overall can benefit the community in a very, very positive way. So just before I start, I'm going to give a little background on who I am. I'm a 17-year-old resident, longtime resident of Montclair, and an upcoming senior at Montclair High School. I'm the president of the skateboard club at Montclair High School, which I started in my sophomore year, so that's 2 years ago. Throughout my whole high school career, I've been pushing to get a skate park here in town after experiencing firsthand what it's like not having a safe or legal place to practice your sport in town, unlike basketball courts or tennis courts or a swimming pool even. So to start it off, skateboarders have been treated poorly and unfairly, especially by the police. And there is this unmerited negative stigma that has been with skateboarding since its beginning. And it is what causes a lot of people to back away from it and maybe even tell their kids not to practice skateboarding. It receives, and because of that, it receives little reinforcement from the overall community, and people won't help the cause, like, for example, the getting a skate park in town. So growing up skateboarding, I've had many run-ins with the police. It's just kind of a normal thing. When you grow up skateboarding, it happens. It's almost embedded into your mind. Let me give you an example. So one particular experience was, I was maybe a freshman, 8th grade. I was skateboarding around the YMCA. That was a normal spot. A lot of skateboarders in Montclair go to that area, downtown area, Church Street. There was an officer parked in his car close to where I was skating. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't hurting anyone. I wasn't stealing or vandalizing. But the officer approached me very angrily, telling me that skateboarding in that area was illegal, and if he wanted to, he could have arrested me. At this point, being a young Black kid, I was always taught to never backtalk a police officer and always just answer with yes, sir, or no, sir. After that experience, every time I was approached by a police officer, I would always ask why. And I would share what it's like being a skateboarder, constantly being stopped by police just because you're out there practicing your sport. As a skateboarder, you almost get used to it. You get used to the police or an angry resident yelling at you, and you begin to plan for it. For example, when me and my friends go out to skate, we have to think of where we are going to go when we get kicked out of the first spot, and then where we're going to go when we get kicked out of the second, and so on. Sometimes you would get lucky and not get kicked out, but again, that was rare. If you ever look at the location of most skate parks in this area, focusing on the West Orange skate park, you'll notice that the town tucked it behind a building in the back of a dead-end road. It doesn't look appealing at all to families and other young skaters that are just starting out. It is the exact opposite of what we want our park in Montclair to look like. We want it to be an open, multi-use space that is inviting to families and people of all ages. Some of the money that is funded to the Montclair Police Department could be redirected and should be redirected to youth services where it belongs. It could help fund more youth programs and the building of beautiful multi-use spaces such as the skate park. If you've been following our fight to get a skate park in town, you'll know that recently we were given a temporary spot to skate in Montclair so we do not have to skate illegally, and that is located at the Rand tennis courts. Some residents don't agree with this and take to online chat rooms where they condemn the town for giving us this spot. One person even calling it a trash dump. But that doesn't discourage us because skaters are determined and resilient. Skateboarding is the 12th most participated sport in America. Unlike other sports, it fosters numerous benefits for millions of children and teens. It is a great way to exercise. It is an avenue for young people to find commonalities and to form friendships. And it teaches the values of self-discipline and hard work, which is very, very important. Kids who are busy skateboarding are not sitting at home playing video games, watching TV, or eating junk food. We have been working to dismantle that negative stigma and show that skateboarding is filled with compassion, hard work, and friendship. Getting a skate park in Montclair is helping us show that skateboarding is different from other sports, and it's the opposite of that negative stigma. And unlike many other organized sports, such as football, basketball, soccer, stuff like that, skateboarding does not discriminate. No matter your age, religion, race, or gender, everyone shares the same passion for the sport you really just cannot find elsewhere. So I have three commonly asked questions I usually get when I'm talking about the skate park or skateboarding in general. So one of them is, what is the negative stigma attached to skateboarding and why does it have this stigma? So the negative stigma is basically that skateboarding is for bad kids and only bad kids are skateboarders. And skateboarding has just been connected to rebelliousness in general over the past years. The stigma has been around since skateboarding started in maybe in the 1970s, stemming from surfer culture, and it has grown and manifested into how people see skateboarders today. Another question, what do you mean when you say multi-use space regarding the park? So some people don't understand what multi-use may mean, and basically what I'm saying when I say multi-use is I want it to be more than just skateboarding. We want there to be an area for music, people can come and play live shows. We want a community garden that could be tended by skaters, for skaters, and for the rest of the community in that area. And we want open seating areas to make it feel more welcoming, and rather than having a all fenced in park that wouldn't be welcoming to families and others. Last question, this is a big one. So how often do you guys get harassed by cops and homeowners? Do you think skaters are seen as symbols of poverty / lower class by the town? And does that imagery of baggy pants, ripped clothes, and old sneakers contribute to why skaters are policed so heavily? So as a skateboarder, I can tell you firsthand that you get harassed almost every time you go out to skate. You probably won't be able to get a full session without someone telling you that what you're doing is bad, or you're making a mess, you're just ruining stuff, you're not doing anything good. And that could either be by a police officer or just an angry resident that just doesn't want skateboarders there. So having the police kick you out, it becomes a normal occurrence. And as I said earlier, you almost have to plan where you're going to go when you get kicked out. So to answer the next, I think that skaters are seen as a lower class, even though that is not true. But this is all because of that negative stereotype I talked about earlier, that skating is only for bad kids who do nothing but make trouble. And it really just couldn't be wrong. It really just couldn't be more wrong. So the way skaters dress is the way of our expressing ourselves. If you ever watch skating, you'll be able to tell that skateboarding is a very expressive sport. Everyone skates differently, and everyone has their different style or steez. It's what they identify with, and you almost see it in the way they dress. Now that might be identifying to police officers seeing baggy pants and ripped clothes, but that's just how it is. That's how skateboarders identify themselves, how they express themselves, and it's through their clothing. Okay, thank you. That is it.
Thank you so much, Antonello. Appreciate that. Next, we will have a presentation from Pressman Interns, Gabe Sloan, Sahai Lukes, and Caleb Levine. Hi. So, Pressman Interns, Gabe Sloan, Sahai Lukes, and Caleb Levine will be taking a deep dive into our budget and our police data, force reports, force size, and expenditures. They will discuss the implications that data has and compare Montclair's budget data with surrounding towns, as well as with national trends. They will also bring in outside academic sources and studies to help us explain Montclair, to help them explain Montclair trends, and perhaps us have a healthy dialogue with the council members and the mayor. Montclairians, according to their perspective, love to claim that their town is special. The report will be detailing how they are indeed special and how we are indeed special in all the wrong ways, and how they also manage in other ways to fit in just fine with the nationwide narrative of systemic racism and policing. Take it away.
Thank you, Deirdre.
You're
So once
welcome.
again, I'm Gabe. I'm currently a senior at the University of Pittsburgh, and I was a leader in this Pressman Social Action Internship, but I graduated Montclair High School in 2017. Sahai, you're muted.
Sorry. All right, my name is Sahai, and I am a rising senior at Montclair High School.
And I'm Caleb Levine, and I'm a rising junior at Montclair High School.
So to start off, I just want to say thank you all so much for coming to our town hall meeting. It really means a lot. The country is at an inflection point right now. The murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many more sparked a wave of protests, which are still going on, taking place in all 50 states across the country. These murders and protests have brought to the forefront of public discourse issues that have long pervaded our country, but are now impossible to ignore. Racism pervades our country, our schools, our police department, our systems of governance, our media, our consumption, everything. National outrage combined with stay-at-home orders have driven many people to get involved with activism within their communities in a way they never have before. In Montclair, there's a notion that we do things differently than other towns and cities in America. Many of us pride ourselves on being progressive, diverse, and in a vain sense, better. And I too have had strong pride in our town as being a sense of a safe haven from racism and discrimination. We call it our bubble. But over the past 6 weeks, my peers and I in the Pressman Social Action Internship have been digging through budgets, force reports, academic papers, press releases, all of it. And we found a lot of evidence that is contrary to our claims of progressiveness. Specifically, we focused on our policing policies and budget, and we've been operating on the fact that a budget is the biggest tell of a town's values and priorities. Money doesn't lie. In time for this presentation, we look through budgets from 1999 to the recently approved 2020 budget.
So before we delve into the budget, we want to start with the data collected by Force Report NJ, which is a comprehensive statewide database of police force in New Jersey. We want to contextualize the budget of our police department within their behavior. And some of you may have heard this number already. Between 2012 and 2016, based on population, Black people in Montclair were 490% more likely to have force used on them than their white counterparts. Based on arrests, Black people were 15% more likely to have force used on them by the Montclair Police Department. And according to Force Report New Jersey, under the NYPD's model, 33 officers would have been cited for review. We used force at a higher rate than 337 departments in New Jersey, out of 468 departments total. Now, these figures have been repudiated by the Montclair Police Department, who say that this number is exaggerated because every time a force incident happens, every officer involved has to file a report, and thus they are getting bad press for doing the proper paperwork.
But we looked into this. We parsed through all of the use of force reports in Montclair between 2017 and the present. And after accounting for duplicates, we found that Black residents of Montclair are about 300% more likely to have force used on them than white people, 300%. And we also found that 1/3 of use of force incidents were in response to a mental health episode. And of these mental health related uses of force, 78% of victims were Black. Listed under type of incident: suicidal person, emotionally disturbed person, psychological crisis. Are these the people our police should be using force on? Should the police be involved in these cases at all? According to the Treatment Advocacy Center, someone with untreated mental illness is 16 times more likely to be killed by police. And 1 in 4 fatal police shootings involve someone with severe mental illness. So why do we expect our officers to be able to resolve these situations with insufficient preparation or expertise? It's not fair to our officers, but it's especially not fair to the citizens of our town, especially those of color, who face violence at the hands of our police. This needs to change. And change is by no means unprecedented. A program created 30 years ago in Eugene, Oregon, sends out unarmed medics and crisis workers to calls involving substance abuse, mental illness, and homelessness. These professionals are specifically trained to deal with these situations, and this past year in Eugene, these teams responded to 1 in 5 911 calls. We need a radical shift in our town's policing policies, ideally towards something similar to the program in Eugene. But at the very least, we should be in active discussion with experts in hopes of coming to an informed determination about the future of this town's police and how to best serve all citizens of Montclair. So why aren't we? I'd like you to keep these ideas in mind as we move on to discuss this town's budget.
So let's continue with Montclair's actual budget numbers. This year, the police department will receive a little over $16 million, which is 17.5% of the total town budget and the largest single slice of the budget for any one area. A few line items of note: of that $16 million, 96% of it is for salaries. We also spent $30,000 on a new patrol vehicle this year, and last year we spent $60,000 to buy 1 new patrol vehicle and 1 new decoy vehicle. This year's $16 million amounts to over $414 on police per capita in Montclair. However, this is just part of the picture because pinning down a concrete number for all police items can be tricky. Littered throughout the budget each year are various expenses and projects that are directly related to the police department, but not demarcated as part of it. For example, the demarcated police budget figures do not include the value of accumulated absences, nor do they include pensions, or the 12, by my count, pension increases marked in the budgets in the last 20 years. They do not include the $120,000 salary of the school resource officer, aka cops in our schools. They do not include other such notable expenses as the $233,000 for the acquisition of heavy police vehicles this year, nor do the annual police budgets include the 5-year $1.26 million capital project, which ran from 2011 to 2016, which among other items paid for a mobile command unit, which has been advertised as a precaution against an overwhelming terrorist attack. So the police budget is actually larger than meets the eye. And just to contextualize the $414 per capita for police, let's look at our town's Department of Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services accounts for just over 2% of the total budget, which amounts to $48.50 per capita. In the midst of a global pandemic, our town's public health expenditures per capita is equivalent to a nice bottle of wine. We spend more than 8.5 times on policing than we spend on health.
So what do our police spend their time doing? Well, as our own Police Chief Conforti has said, they spend much of their time on traffic, which is consistent with how cops everywhere in this country spend much of their time, according to a New York Times investigation and a study from the International Journal of Police Strategies and Management. So let's see how our budget reveals, what our budget reveals about traffic fines and where that intersects with race.
So in 2019, we realized in cash over $2.5 million from fines and costs from our municipal court, which is where your traffic tickets are recorded. And yes, that is more than the entire Health and Human Services budget. Adjusted for inflation, the town's revenue from municipal court fines has almost doubled since 2012.
So a fundamental question here is, why do we need armed police officers handing out tickets and directing traffic? Berkeley, California recently announced a plan to radically reduce its police budget by transferring traffic enforcement responsibilities to unarmed non-police employees. This is something we could do right now to improve the well-being and efficiency of our town. So why don't we?
We would also like to know who ends up shouldering this burden. A $200 ticket can mean very different things to someone living in the 4th ward versus someone living in the 1st ward. We were not able to get data pertaining to who gets pulled over in Montclair, but we think it would be a very useful thing to know. However, I am sure we are all thinking in our heads the same unfortunate thing, that it is more likely than not our Black and brown constituents are shouldering the brunt of this $2.5 million bill.
The Stanford Open Policing Project has analyzed over 10 million traffic stops from across the country since 2015 and found, unsurprisingly, that Black and brown people are pulled over disproportionately and stopped and ticketed. Once again, we do not have Montclair-specific data, but if this holds true for Montclair, which I don't think is too much of a leap of logic given the extent of this study, and you couple that with our force report, it would reveal a cycle of intimidation and violence used to collect revenue from Black and brown residents. We think it would be worthwhile for the town to look into this area more concretely.
But of course, none of these figures mean much of anything without context. We need to examine where we stand among our neighbors. So we zoomed out a bit, but it doesn't get much better. The most recent readily available data on police force sizes of neighboring towns is from 2016. We chose a few towns based on similar size, crime rates, median income, racial breakdown, and relative proximity, and plotted the number of police officers per 10,000 residents of each town versus each town's crime rates. Here's how West Orange, Teaneck, Clifton, Wayne, and Ridgewood compare to Montclair.
So this shows our violent crime rate versus our officers per 10,000 residents. And this one shows our total crime rate versus our officers per 10,000 residents. And you can look at how far out we are from everyone else and how many more officers we pay compared to everyone else. We are a complete regional aberration. These plots show us that lowering the police budget has not resulted in a higher crime rate in these other towns. And in fact, we outspend all of the towns we studied and still have a higher crime rate than most of them. Our spending is absolutely out of control and unjustifiable, and it makes zero sense. And get this, we are not moving steadily back towards the rest of the pack either. We are moving further away. From 2011 to 2020, holding for inflation, Montclair's per capita police spending has increased by over 9%. West Orange's per capita police spending, however, decreased by 10%. In fact, since 1999, holding for inflation, our per capita police spending is up over 26%. So we should require our police force to shrink just to be aligned with some of our neighbors, which, to be clear, is not the end game, but merely a step in the process to get us back to the starting line. And by doing that, we can save at least a few million in payroll alone to be allocated elsewhere. During a police department budget presentation on the 18th of February this year, Chief Conforti announced they were looking to fill 4 spots. At the very least, these hires need to be put on hold if they have not been hired yet. Once again, we are a complete aberration locally, and when our spending is coupled with our force report rankings, we move from just being an aberration to becoming an abomination.
You know, we hope these charts make you mad. We hope the force reports make you mad. We hope the budget makes you mad. They should. The time to be proactive against insensitivity within our system in our town is now. Many of us are hopeful that Montclair can become the face of innovative, progressive social reform that we proclaim to be, but we can't move forward if we don't first acknowledge where we are. These statistics reflect poorly on our town, and failure to act on this information will further expose the prejudice within our community, a community that we hold so much pride in. For the respect and safety of our citizens of color, we ask that you take action, establish equality and justice in our town, because Montclair Police Department should set a positive example, not an exceptionally bad one. Again, I want to thank you all speakers, counselors, and attendees for joining us today.
Thank you. Next, we have from the Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Montclair, UUCM, Johanna Foster of the Social Justice Coalition, and Annalise Scherfen of the Undoing Racism Committee. They will be presenting on just some of these services that Montclair offers and or could offer in comparison to the police budget and in accordance with our Unitarian, or rather their Unitarian Universalist faith principles, excuse me. So they also want to highlight the relative cost of chronically underfunded services such as affordable housing, emergency medical services, tutoring programs, mental health services, and potential rapid response mental health service, restorative justice programs, district and possibly community, LGBTQ, and youth and adult services, recreation and cultural affairs, and all of the health and human services, which encompass so very much. Ladies, welcome, please.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Deirdre. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Johanna Foster, and I know I can speak for Annalise Scherfen when I say that we're so excited to be here with you and to represent the Social Justice Coalition at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation at Montclair. And thanks, Gabe, and all the Pressman interns for organizing this fantastic town hall. You know, thank you, Mayor Spiller, and all the council members that are here today to engage with us. So what Annalise and I would like to do with the time that we have this afternoon is, as Deirdre said, raise up the ways in which our values as Unitarian Universalists have been leading our congregation to examine the town's policing budget more closely, and with an eye on how we might reduce the need for law enforcement intervention on the back end by building up our investments in community and social services on the front end. And to explain what we mean by that, and for folks who may not be familiar with Unitarian Universalism, our faith is guided by a set of 8 core principles, including, but not limited to, the belief in the inherent dignity and worth of all people, the commitment to justice, equity, and compassion in all our affairs, the belief in the right to a free and responsible search for truth and for meaning, as well as the right of conscience and the democratic process. And our 8th principle commits us to dismantling white supremacy. And so it's these principles, among others, taken together, that lead our coalition to the position that policing in America right now, and including in New Jersey, needs to change. And over the past year, our congregation, and particularly through we have a police use of force committee that's connected to our Undoing Racism committee, and we've been intentionally examining specific ways we can take collective action as a congregation to end racism in policing. We've been educating ourselves on reform platforms, on abolitionist frameworks, and most recently on the calls to defund the police. And as this afternoon's conversation is focused on matters of budget, and as Sahaya said so clearly, budgets reflect values. Our congregation has been called by our own shared values to examine where exactly the money is going, how much of it is going to policing, and what exactly that might mean for what is not funded in our town. And our UU faith teaches us that there are critical efforts that we could be engaging in to build up a truly equitable and racially just community. And so what I'd like to do now is to turn it over to Annalise, and she's going to share some of those specific examples that Deirdre had mentioned. We've been exploring some of these alternatives and what it might look like here in Montclair to shift our budget priority. So I'm going to turn it over to Annalise.
Thanks, Johanna, and thanks everybody else for being here today on the call. I wanted to thank Nadia Herrera of our congregation for creating these graphics that we are about to see. Go ahead, Johanna. So as Johanna mentioned, across the nation and here in Montclair, there are so many programs that are chronically underfunded, programs that help support public health and safety. As UUs, we support building up programs such as affordable housing, childcare, mental health and drug treatment, LGBTQIA services, and youth services, to name but a few. And as we've learned, Montclair has budgeted approximately $16 million for the police department in 2020, which we've just learned isn't even the whole true amount. So for just 10% of the Montclair police budget, the town could allocate $1,000 a year for property tax bill reductions or rent subsidies for 1,600 senior citizens. Even with just 2% of the Montclair police budget, the town could allocate $500 in rent subsidy every month per year to 60 senior citizens or low-income residents. There are programs the township currently supports that provide well-being, public health, and safety, and they receive a small fraction of what the police receive. In 2020, Recreation and Cultural Affairs is budgeted to receive just $680,000 or 4% of the police budget. Community Services is budgeted for $5.6 million or 35% of the police budget. And all of Health and Human Services is budgeted for approximately $1.9 million. That's just 12% of the police budget. Put another way, the police budget is 853% of the Health and Human Services budget. And just some of the Health and Human Services programs are animal control and sheltering, public health services, senior services, Section 8, and the Office of Environmental Affairs. So now let's take a look at possible programs, which we've compiled using publicly available data from national and local resources. And these are programs that the township does not currently, but could support. First, let's look at childcare for school-aged children. For roughly 20% of the police budget, we could fund the entire cost of before and after care for 1,000 children for the entire school year. And then there's funding for mental health, social workers, and medical emergencies. It would cost fewer than 3% of the total Montclair police budget to add one licensed clinical social worker to each of the 11 public schools. For 10% of the Montclair police budget, the town could treat 160 teenagers per year in intensive outpatient treatment for drug and alcohol addiction. Now, the Montclair Ambulance Unit, which is not paid for by the township, reported expenses of around $1 million in 2018. For roughly 8% of the police budget, Montclair could fund the Montclair Ambulance Unit and increase the number of EMTs by 25%. There's a program in Newark called the Newark Community Street Team. It is community-based, evidence-based, trauma-informed approach to violence reduction. And their reported expenses in 2018 were just $151,000. A similar program at that rate would be just 1% of the Montclair Police budget, Montclair Police Department budget. And the program that Caleb mentioned, the one in Eugene, Oregon, called Cahoots, is a rapid response mental health service, which dispatches unarmed medics and mental health workers to calls concerning mental health, such as welfare checks or possible overdoses. This program is able to run for just 2% of their police budget. And here in Montclair, there are tutoring and other youth services that the township could support. The reported expenses of the Amani program were just $135,000 in 2017. If the township were to take on this program and its budget were doubled, this invaluable Montclair program would still be less than 2% of the Montclair police budget. Union Congregational Church's Side Door program, who have named the Montclair Police Department as dependable allies since the program's inception, cost just $25,000 in 2018-19. And that doesn't include the use of space, cleaning, insurance, and financial services. But it's a safe place for kids to go, to be kids, and even get food. The township could run a similar program in 3 different areas of town for roughly 0.5% of the police budget. And for ongoing anti-racist training for the school district, for around $36,000, 120 teachers could receive undoing racism training for just 0.2% of the police budget. And there are even more programs that could benefit from new and increased funding. Programs such as transportation for students living in the South End, fully funding restorative justice in Montclair, and expanding to community-based restorative justice. Food distribution, the need for which has become startlingly apparent during this pandemic, and LGBTQIA youth and adult services. There's been a queer youth drop-in program here in Montclair that was completely volunteer funded except for a small donation from Bloomfield Pride. The township is about to lose points on the Human Rights Campaign's Municipality Equality Index yet again because we lack any municipal services for LGBTQIA teens, elders, or people who are housing insecure. In addition to having no municipal services for people living with HIV and AIDS. As UUs, we are exploring how we can support the building up of public health and safety services in our congregational home of Montclair. These are just some of the programs that are consistent with our UU values that could be supported by the township if we rethink how our budget is apportioned. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. Next, we will hear from the Montclair Beyond Policing organizers, Lily Quee, Maya Jenkins, and Ella McDonald. Again, they are going to and want to, and for the whole purpose of this Zoom meeting, urge Montclair to embrace its core values of cherishing Black lives, ensuring individual and collective safety and well-being provided for all residents, and building strong relationships with our community. Towards these ends, they urge the council to divest from our overfunded police department, according to their statements, that disproportionately targets Black community members, and to instead, as we've been hearing on the call, direct funding towards essential services and programs like housing, food security, schools, and healthcare, including the much talked about and needed mental health services. Ladies.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today, and thank you so much to Deirdre for moderating. Like she just said, we're Montclair Beyond Policing, which is a new organization in Montclair working to defund the Montclair Police Department and build alternatives that will keep our communities safe. So we have these slides, and there's going to be a lot of content on them, but know that we'll make sure to send out these slides to anyone who's interested and who RSVP'd for the event. All right, so first, we've heard so many different amazing speakers today, and I just want to sort of take us back and ground us in the values that we all hold and which are why we all showed up today. So first, we know that all Black lives matter to all of us. We know that Black trans lives matter to all of us. We know that one of the core reasons we're here today is to figure out how we can best protect Black lives in Montclair. We all value individual safety of ourselves, of our loved ones, and those that we care about. We value the collective well-being of our community. Again, that's why we're all here on this town hall. We care about providing for people's needs, like Deirdre just said, and like has been addressed throughout people's presentations. We care about mental health, access to quality schooling, a holistic COVID-19 response that addresses the economic fallout and health consequences of COVID-19, as well as fair housing, community spaces, green spaces, the skate park, as Antonella brought up, spaces that we can share in as our community, and food security. And lastly, most importantly, we value developing strong relationships with one another. So I hope that we can all ground ourselves in these values as we continue, and sort of look at how we can best achieve these values that are not being fully realized.
So we share these values as Montclairians, but our municipal budget, as our fellow speakers have so beautifully illustrated, prioritizes the police above any other department. This imbalance is not incidental. It's widely known that US police forces were first created to protect the property interests of the white and wealthy. This history may seem remote, but in more recent decades, expansions of police funding and presence in so many parts of public life have gone hand in hand with programs of economic austerity that disproportionately harm Black and brown communities. The Nixon, Reagan, and Clinton eras saw the massive withdrawal of state funding from education, housing, healthcare, food access, and other public programs. This organized abandonment, as Dr. Ruth Wilson Gilmore calls it, was then used to justify an explosion of police intervention into school discipline, homelessness, mental health and substance use crises, and other social problems connected to structural racism and poverty. In short, we have spent the past half century divesting from communities and investing in police. Given this history, it's sadly unsurprising that the police are often weaponized against Black people in instances like Amy Cooper's phone call in Central Park or others closer to home. We should understand these moments not as isolated racist acts, but in the context of a long devaluation of Black life and the abandonment of Black, brown, and poor people to police management. When the Amy Coopers of the world see a Black person, they see them through the eyes of generations of public policy as a problem. These individual racist acts express exactly what our budgets already proclaim, that Black community members don't deserve safety, stability, access to public spaces, and common goods. They deserve to be policed. Our own Black community members have heard this message loud and clear. Montclair Beyond Policing has been collecting survey results about experiences with racial profiling by Montclair police. And Black Montclairians have recently shared accounts on social media of being stopped or arrested on trivial or no grounds in their schools, in public parks, in their own homes, while driving, and clearly while skating. At the same time, the continued existence of a food desert and the absence of busing in the Fourth Ward go unaddressed. And a rent control ordinance, as Mr. Scott mentioned, that would help rein in the soaring cost of housing is under threat by a wealthy property owners group. In these ways, Montclair is no different from the rest of the country. We have forfeited our responsibility of care in favor of increased social control. Montclair can break this cycle, but to do so, we cannot rely on the same police reforms that have appeared routinely throughout the past century to quell public outrage over police brutality. Procedural reforms like diversity in hiring, de-escalation and bias training, community policing, and body cameras have been shown in study after study to be ineffective in curbing racial disparities in policing. But worse, they ultimately funnel more municipal funds to already bloated police budgets and expand police powers and presence in already over-surveilled neighborhoods. Minneapolis, where police officers brutally killed Black resident George Floyd on May 25th of this year, had poured $4.75 million into exactly these kinds of reforms in 2015. These reforms presuppose that the problems of policing come from individual bias and bad apples. They ignore the structural role of policing in managing communities that have been abandoned to gentrification, underfunded schools, lack of health and mental health resources, and food insecurity. As long as we keep siphoning money into reforms, hoping the problems with policing can be solved through more policing, our fundamental priorities will never shift, and we will keep falling short of our values.
The time has come to defund the Montclair Police Department. Police don't really solve or prevent most of the harm that occurs in our communities. Instead, they create new instances of harm. They often escalate situations and operate primarily to threaten, surveil, and warehouse poor people and Black and Brown communities. The very people who most need safety feel that they cannot call the police because they know that this would only make the situation worse or threaten their lives. You've seen the data. Montclair is an outlier on police spending, and that must end. We cannot continue to spend over $16 million a year on the Montclair Police Department. Now is also the time to think about how we can better, more effectively, and caringly meet the needs of our residents. Now is the time to act on the decades of intellectual and activist work in this space and create solutions to systemic racial violence. We are not talking about tinkering with the system. We're talking about real steps towards justice. Here are just a few examples of what we mean when we talk about crafting a thoughtful, care-based response to the needs of the folks in our town. First, we want to move money from the police department to the departments with the capacity to truly support Black folks, people of color, and everyone in this town. And I actually want you all to take a few minutes today to think deeply about what you'd like to see better funded in Montclair. Maybe it's the stairs at our high school, maybe it's school buses, maybe it's affordable housing. You've heard a lot of people so far talk about where they'd like to see money spent. A few folks have mentioned that many of the calls that MPD gets are related to mental health challenges or even crises. As I'm sure you all know, we have a Health and Human Services department that is currently funded, as we have seen, far, far, far less than the Montclair Police Department, but which holds under its umbrella community health programs. We know the community health encompasses far more than vaccines, which is the gist of what's currently represented on the website. And together we can reimagine, design, and then fund a Health and Human Services department with the capacity to meet folks facing mental health crises in the field and support them without the looming threat of force. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We have the foundations. We need to introduce a more transformative approach to justice. We can reduce harm, and we have the responsibility to do so. We can work to divorce the police from the delivery of healthcare services, which other cities, as you've heard, are doing and working to do. We can reimagine safety and think of new ways to support each other, be it receiving training in mitigatory health services or pledging not to call the police unless it feels absolutely necessary. We can demand that Montclair fully democratize the budgeting process so that we can have a say in the way that our collective resources are spent. One part of that democratic process must include defunding the Montclair Police Department. Folks often ask what defunding might look like when I talk about it. And we know that defunding is a process. It is an arc that bends towards the abolition of the police department. But these are a few examples of where we can start. We can remove the police from all of our schools, and this will undoubtedly reduce the criminalization of Black students at our schools and free up money in the budget for restorative justice mechanisms. We can establish non-police alternatives to 911 calls involving people with mental health needs or other forms of health crises. We can deny benefits and pay to officers under investigation for using excessive force. And we can institute the requirement that police officers, and not our town, not our tax dollars, pay for misconduct lawsuits and use of force settlements.
Yeah, like Maya just said, defunding is a process. And we know while these are a few steps and avenues for the change we see right now, there's no set strategy or even a series of boxes we can check off to get there. It's an essential part of the pursuit of Black liberation, and it intersects with many of the problems we see today in our communities, like the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on Black communities and the wealth and power gap between Black and non-Black residents in our town. It's an ongoing process to move funding and resources away from policing and towards services that keep our Black and Brown residents safe and healthy. I want to invite you all to continue to engage in this fight by getting involved with Montclair Beyond Policing, and we want to offer a couple of ways that folks can do that. So first, we have a newsletter that we're starting, and we'd love for folks to, if anything in this presentation resonated with you, just take a moment to sign up for a newsletter. If you have a phone with you, you can just pull up the camera app and scan this QR code, or you can also go to the link below it, which is bit.ly/mbpnews, all in capitals. And there will be an option on this form to indicate if you'd like to start participating in our weekly meetings, which we have. But regardless of how you'd like to engage in our work, we'd really like for you all to receive updates. So definitely take a moment to do that. And we'll also send out these slides to everyone who RSVP'd. And we also put our contact information at the bottom, so feel free to reach out to any of us with questions about defunding the police in Montclair, the work that we do, just any questions.
Awesome.
And lastly, we just have one action item for everyone on this meeting. The mayor and a couple of the town councilors are on this call, and they would love to hear from us. So make sure to write to them to express your desire to see the Montclair Police Department defunded. And if you follow us on Instagram and on other social media, you can see a letter template we've made in order to do that. So thank you again, everyone, so much for having us, and we hope to engage with you in our future work.
Thank you so much, ladies. We are running a little bit over for time, but I'm going to try to help us stay close to 5:30. Next, we will go into the questions for Mayor Spiller and the council members who have so graciously joined us. I first want to thank Mayor Spiller, Lori Price Abrams, and David Cummings for being on this Zoom meeting. It's very much appreciated. I know we've heard a lot today, but the pre-presented questions are going to be asked, and Mayor Spiller, feel free to take the lead on that or have someone else answer that question. If either of the council members would like to add any commentary to that, feel free to do that. Okay, the first question is, and this is again for anyone who would propose to answer it. How do you plan to address working towards a defunded police force?
Well, first, Deirdre, great to see you. How are you? Thank you for helping to moderate this and be part of the process. I want to thank also everybody for the presentations. Certainly thank you to everybody who's participating. I think first and foremost, and certainly I think I speak for my colleagues when I say our primary job right now as we look to see what options are available is to listen to everybody and to listen to what people mean when they say defund the police department. For those of you on many of the Zoom calls, some which were noted, whether it be Blue Wave and others, I know I have and my colleagues have as well. You heard a lot of different discussions there. It meant different things to different people. But it's nice to see in very concrete terms what various entities view that as. I think that's helpful as we engage in that conversation. Certainly as our process, our council and councils generally function, I think as people know, we have subcommittees of our council. I think we have a public safety subcommittee as well who I know will be looking at these different pieces, trying to gather that information, sort through the different components. And as was noted, there is always a transition as you engage in any of these processes, and I think they'll be looking at this work very closely. So it's a broad, all-encompassing task, which includes listening, which includes then distilling that information, seeing which pieces are specifically relevant to Montclair, how things can be adapted, modified, best suited to our needs, what action steps can be taken, who's responsible for those action steps. Just note a lot of the things noted in some of the presentations are things that schools are authorized to do, some township, et cetera. So, figuring out those components as well, soliciting broader community input as well once the ideas are brought forward that the township would consider, seeing how people are supportive or not of those different components, and then working towards implementation in the different categories. So I think it's a process, as I think everyone recognizes, and that process has many areas, many input sources, and then also really through our structure that's in place has a method for it to be looked at and then brought back to the full council.
Thank you. So another part of that question is, and you mentioned a subcommittee, would that subcommittee be looking at relief to small businesses and put funding towards health and education?
Well, again, I think there's a lot of different subcommittees and there's a lot of different pieces there and a lot of different funding. You know, I had to smile when the thought was, hey, can you think of things that you'd like to have more funding for? You know, as I closed my eyes, I probably thought of every single thing, you know, that we have funded and don't currently fund. I mean, the challenge of it is, you know, we are trying to make sure that dollars are there now. I think we've been pretty fortunate over the last number of years to, quite frankly, increase funding for all of the support services in town and the other additional programs that are offered not directly through the town, but that we help support financially. We've increased dollars in all those areas, but you know, there's always more that's needed. And I think that's some of the challenge, while we've also tried to be mindful. It was noted also, you know, of people's tax burden, and especially during these COVID times when people are unemployed or underemployed. We need to be very mindful of that when additional resources are needed, but less dollars are coming in. You know, we're mindful of all of those pieces. So it would depend on the item that you mentioned there, right? So if it's, you know, if it's a housing piece, you know, yes, the township, quite proudly, by the way, we have our affordable housing that's dedicated for Montclair, specifically for Montclair residents, unlike any other town. We've made sure, I will note that over the last 8 years, the redevelopment agreements that we have, the new redevelopment agreements we've done have all included that 20% and have had workforce housing. So we're really excited about that. But, you know, there's more dollars that can always be put there as well. But I'll take this opportunity because you note housing, and it was mentioned, you know, early on in this process, quite proudly. And I can say, as the person who introduced the rent control ordinance and helped to get that passed, I can tell you that we are in for a fight in that regard. I know we're all looking forward to the horizon, rightfully so, but we absolutely need to look and make sure we protect the fact that we've recently introduced rent control here in town. I think everybody on this, I would imagine, would agree that is a great step in the right direction. Years and years and years of unsuccessfully happening, and we were able to get that done. It is currently being challenged right now. Currently being challenged by, you know, some landlords who want to be able to raise rents to any amount. So I think it's important for us not to lose sight of that. So it's just to note that it depends on the category you mentioned there. Different things would go to different subcommittees.
I agree with the different things would go to different subcommittees. Lots of the questions here are pointed to just that. What are the subcommittees? How they operate? And what are the categories in which they will be paying attention to? And one of the questions here is, do you see police in Montclair providing a service that cannot be provided by any other town agency?
Well, let me just name the committees. Maybe take the first shot at that, and then let's hear from some of my council colleagues. But first, the town committees that exist right now. Our Economic Development Committee is one bucket. There's financial management. You can imagine when we look at different things we can or can't do, it then goes there. Municipal services and communication, that's another specific bucket. There's education as well, and then there's public safety. So those are the subcommittees of the council. They look at all the different things that we're talking about here, and you can see how different things would fit into those different categories. Now, specific to your second question of, do I think that all of the things that police do can only be handled by police? I'll paraphrase slightly, but the short answer there is no. I think a lot of the things that were noted, I think would be wonderful to have and to have in a more robust fashion. I think there are things we have to look at to determine, can individual municipalities handle them, or do they need to be more broadly incorporated, either by a county or by a state, or how does that conversation go, or partnerships with maybe a few other towns? Because I think one of the big cost drivers is really having somebody or an organization or an entity that is staffed 24/7 that can address a number of different concerns. When you have police that respond to multiple different types of calls, obviously you staff it and they can respond to the different kind of calls you get. If you, as you go more targeted and more specific, which in many instances very well may be more appropriate, you then have to staff all of those to be able to respond to the mental health call at 2 a.m. or whatever that may be. And you have to look at the dollars and see, is the volume that you get there supported by an individual locality putting something in place, or does it need to be in coordination with a few towns or a county again? So I think all those are conversations, but short answer to your question, you know, would I love to see, you know, some of the services that they provided by other entities? Absolutely. And I probably think they would agree as well. Some of the things that they'd, you know, rather see somebody who's better trained or more specifically trained handle. But that's, again, a conversation I think a lot of people have to look at from the logistics of how that would work, how you'd staff that, what the demand is, when that demand comes usually, you know, all of those pieces I think are components that need to be looked at.
Councilor Price Abrams, would you like to speak to that? Yeah, unmute.
Got it. Thank
1 second. You're not unmuted. There you go.
Twice. I just want to start even any remarks by acknowledging the extraordinary voices and the people who've come forward. And, you know, while many of the adults did a very fine job as well, the young people who participated, who've done extensive research and really were excellent spokespeople for their, you know, the causes about which they're passionate. I really want to commend everybody, you know, for showing up and being engaging in the process. And I guess I would reiterate a little bit of what the mayor just said. Things aren't going to change overnight, but I think you're helping to shift a conversation and we're listening. And so I will say that I serve on the 2 committees that I serve on, and these are the ones that are of the council members. When we say those committees, so there's 3 members of the council who serve each of the ones that the mayor named. I serve on municipal services and communication as one committee and education as another. So some of the areas about which we've discussed will fall to some things under my, you know, partial jurisdiction, if you will. And that includes senior services, shared services, human services, fall under and civil rights. I just attended their meeting the other night. So there's just no doubt that it even came up on the Civil Rights Commission meeting the other night. And there's very likely people from Mr. Scott and others who were on that call. You know, there are other places we would want to be able to put money. I think it will have to do with how we will revisit the police budget. And, you know, it's budgeted for now. I think a question was raised earlier whether we would consider through attrition, in a sense, you know, not funding, not paying, not retaining new officers in the place where they were open slots, if in fact they're still open. That's a conversation that can be had. I don't know what positions they are and how they would be otherwise assumed. It's not going to be as easy as take one away from here and we can put a mental health specialist. But I think it's all things that have us a little bit stimulated in thinking. I haven't yet actually sat with the director of Health and Human Services, in part because I've deferred to her extensive just responsibilities during this COVID epidemic, but it's very much on my list to do and to hear about how she manages that department. So what I can say is that I will be putting my attention to that side of the equation, working with my colleagues overall, but looking to the people who maybe are on the public safety committee who would be reviewing where we can go. I will say I don't really like the term defund. I understand for some people there is a continuum and that takes it all the way to the abolition. In my view, I think the conversation that I see us entertaining in the near term is probably more about a reallocation. And that is, I think, the space that we're considering it in, if in fact we could be doing more with our resources, again, to meet human needs in different ways, while we still maintain kind of accountability for the safety of our residents in a respectful and fair way, of course.
Thank you. Councilor Cummings, would you like to speak to this?
Yeah, sure. And first of all, I will say it's an impressive list of PowerPoints. I've already asked Gabe, please share all of them with me. Very informative, so good work by all. And to what Lori and Mayor Spiller was saying, I actually am on the Public Safety Committee and Chief Conforti and I and Will Young, we're meeting on Thursday to start having some discussions about the discussions that have been having. I think no one is afraid of the conversation, but we want to be thoughtful. We also want to take in all considerations from everyone, and I think get to a point where people are engaged and active, because this conversation isn't going anywhere. And so I don't think we're running from anything as much as we want to make sure that the way we move forward is one that's equitable and one that makes sense for Montclair. I want to be very clear when I say that, because I believe our police department as constituted has done a very good job under Chief Conforti. I'm a supportive of Chief Conforti, but I think that, you know, based on the information provided, there are some things that we can look at and look into. And so at the end of the day, I think that's the best part of all of this.
Thank you very much. We are getting close to the end of our time. However, there are a couple of more questions that are on slate. I will present them to the mayor and the council. So if you could just hang with us just for a little while longer, that would be great. This topic segues perfectly into the next question. What example from another city is Montclair using to study defunding the police department? It has been stated by others that there are communities similar to Montclair in size, crime rate, demographics, etc., in which far less is spent in both absolute terms and as a percentage of the town budget. So I don't know if you would like to speak to that or give a general overview as to how Montclair is using this study, if at all.
Well, I think that first and foremost, I think it's always a great thing to study entities or towns that have started to do some of this work or are further along in that continuum, because you don't then have to reinvent the wheel. So I think that's the first thing. I will note that that deeper dive is required. Certainly, we appreciate all of us that receiving all the slides with all this information. But as it was noted with the other cities towns that were mentioned today on today's call, that's great. I think these are places we can look. But I'll also note, it's important for us to take that deeper dive. I know that in our initial just check-in call a few weeks ago, an example of a township was given, and my council colleagues, Councilman Cummings, was able to do some quick research on it and find that it was, overwhelmingly not the same as Montclair. So we have to dig a little deeper to see, what they look like, what are all the specifics. Let's look at the key pieces, and it doesn't mean they have to be exactly the same, but we have to recognize and understand they may have different challenges and different assets that they're working with. But whatever that is, I think that's where, right now it's a process of reaching as wide as you can, right? Opening up and listening as much as you can, getting as much data as you can, not narrowing it to, we're only going to look at this town or this city or this other place. I think right now it's get as much data, funnel as much data as we can to our public safety committee, let them engage in the work and the conversations, understand the different perspectives. They come back, and part of that distillation process I talked about, they look at it and say, we heard about these 7 towns, and quite frankly, these 3, for these reasons, I don't think they really work for us. These ones had great ideas. These are reasons why we can take some pieces. I think all of that work remains, and I certainly at this stage wouldn't be one kind of narrowing it down to say these are the towns we're looking at or this is something that would work. I think it's more broad. We're listening to what's been happening everywhere, and as much as people keep sharing, we're going to keep directing for the ongoing work.
And Deirdre, I just want to add to what Mayor Spiller said. This is the beginning. Nothing is going to happen overnight. So when you say immediately do this, immediately do that, no, I'm very realistic and transparent. And I think this is going to take time because there's a lot of people and a lot of different organizations that have to be included in the discussion, and which many are on this call and probably listening in. So, but I think at the end of the day, as a council, we have heard enough. We know that this is something we're going to get involved with. And at the end of the day, I think if you give us that time, clearly there'll be a lot of discussions. As I said, I reached out to Chief Conforti after the call we had a couple of weeks with you guys, said, hey, Chief, do you mind if we have a conversation? These are some things that are brought up. And he said, sure, not a problem. So I think there's a dialogue to be had that will be had. And over time, there'll be some things reported out that, that shows that we're moving the needle.
Thank you. Yes.
If I may, Deirdre, I was struck by some recent news in the last few weeks from Mayor Baraka in Newark. City of Newark's a very different place than the township of Montclair, but to the extent that he took, I think, a bold step to actually, I think it's pending finalizing their budget, but they talked about a 5% shave of their police budget, which is of course by many magnitudes bigger than ours. And that they were going to allocate it to an Office of Violence Prevention. And I had mentioned it to some of the students who had been on a previous call about a thought experiment. What would we do with 5%? I don't know how we get to the 5%. Again, that's going to be part of another committee's purview, but nonetheless on the how could we go that route. And I will note, so we invite that kind of input. And I know we heard a lot of it here today, and we will really want to review it and consider really very interesting ideas in that regard. But I will also note that Mayor Baraka, there isn't one line of thinking among all Black or brown people, clearly, because he very much said I don't think we want to get rid of police. We want to get rid of police that shoot our children and, you know, put their knee on the neck of others. And you know, he was very clear that there's a role for the police. Again, the city of Newark's a different place. And I think we can revision some of how we work with law enforcement and figure out where, you know, we can find dollars for mental health, whether they come from the police budget or another resource potentially. I think the needs that were cited are certainly real.
Thank you. Please do keep in mind that these questions were provided prior to this event. The next question is, and it's regarding the budget, and you can answer it in the manner in which you desire, because it's a loaded question. And I mean that, pun not intended. Why was $30,000 appropriated to Montclair Police for police decoy vehicles in 2019? Why was $233,000 appropriated for the acquisition of police heavy vehicles in 2020? Does the Montclair Police Department really need to buy over $230,000 worth of new SUVs? And is a salary of $198,000 for the chief of police justified? The chief of policy, pardon me. Will the Montclair Police Department commit to never using facial recognition technology? And this kind of delves down into the specific line items of the budget. And this may or may not be a question that can be easily answered, but if you could speak to it, Mayor Spiller, that would be great.
Sure, happy to. We'll note, as you said, shared in advance, but at 7:40 last night when we received these questions, I can tell you, trying to dig for some of those answers is not as easy. But I will say this more broadly. Certainly, as you note, a lot of different things there. There are lots of different reasons, and I can say that on the Zoom calls I've been on, where Chief Conforti has been on, he has been very open in getting back to individuals. He, as you can imagine, even does not have the budget in front of him, and certainly I don't either right now. But going through each of those items, he can specifically speak to those and has when anyone has asked him any questions regarding that. So I think that's probably a better place to kind of put specifically those questions. But more broadly, when you talk about the funding that exists, things like decoy vehicles, for example, and other pieces. As was noted before in the presentations, by and large, when you're talking about anything to do with service, and that's pretty much any government function is service, the biggest portion of any part of your budget is going to be for salaries, right? Whether you're talking schools, whether you're talking municipalities, whatever that is, that's your budget. It's for people because that's what you're paying for. So when you look at something like decoy vehicles, it is a low-cost way of addressing challenges that you constantly hear. So for example, the police I know, because I'm copied on all the emails, we're getting, and we as a council previously were getting unbelievably number of calls to say, we need more police officers, we need more people in traffic enforcement, we want all these individuals who are driving too fast around Montclair to be ticketed because they're putting our pedestrians and others in jeopardy, right? That was the call, I guess, a few months ago. And with that, the police said, well, instead of, you noted salaries and some other pieces in there, which are the cost of anything there, let's have these other vehicles that can be placed for much lower cost than hiring more officers to potentially have the same impact which is to slow down people driving through sections of town and to hopefully make it more safe. So I just speak to one of them because each one has its own story behind it, and the chief can get into more detail, I'm sure. But that is one I remember the conversation because we were all copied on those requests from residents who were at the time asking for more officers. And that was the solution to it. That was more cost effective than adding more officers. So it's an example of just, different things have the different costs and different needs, but the chief, I think, can better get into specifics around that. But more broadly, I think you see it's a wide range of issues.
So Deirdre, to his point, I did reach out to Chief Conforti about these specific questions, just because it seemed like it was, they were alarming, and his response was regarding the $30,000 for the decoy vehicle. It wasn't anything purchased. They basically repurposed cars that were decommissioned. And then when you look at the $230,000 for the acquisition of police heavy vehicles, that's what the question was. When you say heavy vehicles, you're really saying SUVs. And when you look into the total cost, and this is something I learned with some work I'm doing in the city of Hillside, a police car is just not a car that you take off the showroom. It's equipped with cameras, lights, and all of these things go into the cost that make it seem like it's this astronomical, but really that's what the cost is for fitting a police vehicle. And I'm not being on an apologetic tour, but I just want to say, when we look at these things, we have to take everything into context. So the numbers that you're looking at don't reflect just, we bought 8 cars. They reflect that each car, each vehicle that is used has to be upgraded with the proper equipment required for a vehicle.
Thank you.
And just a note to Councilman Cummings' point, it's to be leading that way. A lot of the new police vehicles that were purchased were not any of those. They were the much smaller, economical cars on fuel efficiency that can be used, around town, that weren't the SUVs, nor, quite frankly, even some of the bigger sedans. They purchased, fuel efficient vehicles to do some of that work too. So I think that's on the other side of the ledger. You probably see that.
Thank you. I am going to shift gears to our final questions because of the time that we have. And I want to thank everyone for still being on with us. The question is going to be around mental health assistance to cops. The question is, are there plans to allocate a part of the budget to support professionals that are better trained to respond to calls regarding individuals under some sort of mental distress? I know that has been spoken of on previous calls with Blue Wave, but if you care to share the information or a update with this audience, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you. And again, specifically to what's being recommended and suggested, I defer to the chief, and certainly our form of government, we have to defer to the chief in many instances, but we can look at the budget. But I can say, and I was on some of those Zoom calls, the one you just alluded to, and have looked at the full accounting of all the items that the chief noted on that call, of all the different trainings that exist. Certainly, I think the short answer is there can always be more, and it can always be done in a manner where those trainings are assessed and reviewed, and we see if they are appropriate and, quite frankly, fitting to what's needed. I think the answer to a question like, should there be more training? Can there be more training? Can training be modified to be more productive to the ask that's needed? Yes, right? That's a yes, and that should always be happening, always be being looked at, and a question that we push to the chief all the time as well, even when he's providing us these lists. So that piece, I think, is something that can be answered, more directly and quite frankly, more obviously. The other piece of it is, are there, which was one of your first questions, maybe, can some of that work itself, the work itself, be shifted to another person or another entity doing that? I think that is the kind of conversation around defund police, or I think, as my council colleague Price Abrams noted, really that reallocation or that shifting. I think that's the space that we're looking right now to say, it's a yes, it's a yes, we need those trainings to be exactly what they need to be, and reviewed and assessed for effectiveness. But we also can be looking at, are there components that can be handled by a different entity in another way, that maybe have somebody who does this all the time versus just being trained in this while they're doing so much other stuff. So I think it's a piece that's a yes and.
So that's a perfect segue into the next question, and I certainly agree with, to a point, your comments about Chief Conforti and or the police department representatives being able to respond to some of these questions, which is fair. The question is, looking at historical data from Montclair Police Department, is there a significant portion of policing that could be better handled by well-trained crisis mental health workers? If so, are there successful models or transitioning the police department towards such a shift? Excuse me for fumbling on those words. Councilor Price Abrams, you alluded to the fact that there were some conversations beginning around that, and to Councilor Cummings' point, I think everybody is aware that you all are coming into a lot of work. So thank you for that. Councilor Price Abrams?
Someone asked me a question in the background, so I slightly missed part of the thread, but I wanted to go back and then you can retie me up.
Sure.
What I wanted to say was, with regard to the last question, which of course connects back, is one of the suggestions on, maybe it was the UU's group slides about the 911 and redirecting from there. And it goes to, I guess, what Mayor Spiller was saying about training. It's a different kind of training too. If we have people at the 911 level, operators who are able to send and dispatch the right kind of officials. You know, I don't know whether other towns, you know, it would cost more money if we're going to send a specialized person for mental health or substance abuse along with an officer. And I don't know if that person is, if the person who's got the social service capacities is at risk in any way. I think they're suited to dealing with the personality or the condition a person might be found in uniquely, but I don't know if they are safe to go by themselves. It depends on the call. So anyway, all of that I think may be interesting to have transition to the 911 operator. Can I ask you to reframe the question one more second and I'll happily answer it better?
Sure, and I'll just add a little bit to it. The question is looking at historical data from the police department here in Montclair. Is there a significant portion of policing that could be better handled by well-trained crisis mental health workers? And the second part of that question is, if so, are there models of transitioning police departments towards such a shift? And I can tell you that this kind of ties into what Montclair Police Department is already doing in several areas. One of them is their domestic violence, where they do partner with others. So do you know if there's a model that's being talked about that transitions police departments towards, you know, crisis training?
I do not know that, and I think the people who've done so much research, I hope, and will be sharing with us, and they will otherwise be presenting it in appropriate, you know, formats that we can, you know, continue to educate ourselves on the ways that we might transition these services, and again, how we could do it in the most streamlined and effective way, not to duplicate or cause, you know, more dollars to be spent, but the right dollars to be spent. So I don't have models, but I welcome hearing about them.
Hey, Deirdre, I would say that listening in, you know, the point they made about the Berkeley Police Department, right? On the surface, it's like, oh, that's a good model. We should consider, we should look into. So I bold that on my notes, but I can't sit here and tell you right now, we're going to copy that. I think it's a matter of, as Lori has said, of finding, you know, some of these, following up on them and see, you know, what is possible and what's not possible.
Okay, thank you. So on that note, I'm going to thank you all for participating. There is one last question from the presenters, and it is, will you commit to meeting with representatives from this town hall to discuss the outcomes of your research and your proposed next steps? This is regarding addressing policing in Montclair within the next couple of weeks, or at least provide a date to the organizers of when that time frame might happen.
Well, short answer on that is yes. I think our engagement here speaks to that. I think, as was noted before, we've been having conversations. We had pre-conversations to this town hall, and of course, follow up after. I think I would just note, while we all want to move through this as expeditiously as possible, I note something that you know, Councilman Cummings had noted before. You know, this is a process that you want to make sure is done correctly, and it's going to take some time. You know, nothing ever happens as quick as you'd like, probably, or exactly the way you'd like. But we've got to make sure it happens, and it happens for our community the right way. And we also make sure we broaden and have all the different groups that are having these conversations connect, because I can tell you, and I'm sure everyone on here might imagine, my council colleagues and I are doing numerous Zoom meetings with different groups with slightly different asks or different ways of looking at a challenge and different pieces they're bringing to this. So I think we have to be mindful as we bring back and engage in this conversation. We want to make sure we're doing it in a way that brings all these different thoughts together, brings all these different groups together, so that it's not just everybody who's on this Zoom meeting who's hearing this specific answer, you know, who had these concerns. That needs to be paired with some of the other groups who've reached out to us with maybe slightly different concerns or different ways they'd like to look at these things. That way we understand the diverse group of thoughts that are out there, and see how we can marry those all together in a cohesive way that works for Montclair. So short answer is yes. Longer answer is we all need to work together on this. We need to have broad coalitions around this. There's a lot of work to be done. We've got a lot of great people in town here that can help do it. We need to include all of them in the conversation, and we need to work through this in a process that serves us well.
Thank you. Before I close this out, Mayor Spiller and Councilor Lori Price Abrams and Councilman David Cummings, do you have any closing remarks that you would like to share with the public?
I'll just close with the way we all started, which is just really thanking all the participants here today, all the presenters here today. This is where we're taking a lot of our guidance from and understanding these issues. So we thank you for that. It really helps shape where we're moving. It is exciting. It's exciting to see everyone on, but it is, as a high school science teacher myself, it is exciting to see so many students or recent students leading the way around this work. So thank you for that. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for taking part of your Sunday. Lori, I saw your disturbance. My little guys are running around behind me too, so I know how that works. But to all of you who are on, it's appreciated. It's a Sunday. There's a lot of other things that people can be doing, but this is important work. You know how important it is, and you've joined on to this to be part of that. So I thank everybody for their participation. I thank my colleagues for the willingness to move on these issues. So thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Price Williams.
I will say, I was thinking at the beginning, and I will put it here at the conclusion, we all took such a gut punch from the recent passing of Representative John Lewis. And, he called us to conscience, to be activists and fight for civil rights. And so while Montclair, as was pointed out, we should not be resting on our laurels, that everything is all well here. We have the right spirit in our young people and the people who are, coaching them and activists in their own right of all ages who are engaged. And that is something I feel very proud about in this town. And, in terms of the council role, we're citizens like you. We happen to have this opportunity to help set the policy, but we're not making the policy by ourselves. So there's a full expectation that this will be leading to additional conversations, and we welcome that. And as soon as we get our feet a little bit firmer on the ground, we're going to be very open to having those meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Cummings. Unmute yourself. Okay.
Thanks a lot. I'm sorry. I'm with my councilor colleagues and just saying thank you. And I'm very excited about the young people kind of leading the charge. That's to me, that's the best part of all this, and the work that they've done. I really commend them for that research. But at the end of the day, I think as a counselor and as a government official, there's some things going on the state level that we're paying attention to. And I think what you'll find from this council as we get to know one another and begin working one another under the leadership of Mayor Spiller, that, all residents will be heard. And I think the communication part will be something that we're going to improve on. But more importantly, I can't commit to when we can meet again, just because I've got to start, I got a list of things that I got to present to people. And again, I have our meetings, but I do say I will, but what I will commit to is the fact that we will meet again. And I think people will be somewhat happy with, some of the things that we present to them, because what you all have given us is a wealth of information and ideas. And so that engagement and that collaboration is something I look forward to continuing.
And on that note, I want to thank you, Mayor Spiller, you, Councilor Price Williams, and you, Councilor Cummings, for doing this. It shows that you have at least a willingness to listen and engage, and that says a lot. I also would like to thank William Scott, who is the co-chair of the Montclair Housing Commission and the chairperson of the NAACP Montclair Chapter Housing Committee. I also want to thank Antonello Tirana, who presented for Essex Skate regarding skateboarding, Pressman Interns, Gabe Sloan, Sahai Lukes, and Caleb Levine. They are part of the organization that you would be getting information back to. I said one of the organizations, I should say. Joanne Foster of UUCM, Social Justice Coalition, and Annalise Scherfen of the UUCM Undoing Racism Committee. And again, last but not least, Lily Quee, Maya Jenkins, and Ella McDonald from Montclair Beyond Policing. So if you have any questions, you can certainly send them to Pressman Interns. I want to thank each of you for participating in this very important dialogue for this very important time. Have a wonderful afternoon. Stay safe out there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks for your efforts.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, all.
Everybody.
Everyone.